and referrals. And we are always pleased to come up with some great guests and just getting out information. And we always ask, of course, that you join us. Again, I'm Cliff Kelly. I'm the host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer always does a great job, Manny Corazari, and we just are just appreciative of the great job that Manny does. Hi, Manny. How you doing? We are pleased to have with us Attorney Brian Kloss, America Heroes Group Advisory Board member, and neutral arbitrator and mediator. And Consular, how are you today?
Couldn't be better, Cliff. Thanks for having me in.
That's great. America's Heroes Group Roundtable outside the city, of course, with Brian Kloss, and we are so pleased to have him with us. And also, we have a guest we're going to discuss with our with our subject today, and she is on our live line. You want to introduce her,
Sure.
Brian? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to introduce Brandy Disbennett Albrecht.
Mhm.
Brandy's been known to me for a number of years. She's doing a lot of work in non-metropolitan populations. Her day job is she's the training manager for the Virginia Department of Veterans Services, managing all their veteran service officers. And the listeners in the greater Chicago area might wonder why Brandy is here talking about Virginia, but we're going to let Brandy explain just the similarities between Virginia and the great state of Illinois, and why it's appropriate to have her here.
Brandy, thank you for being with us. We certainly appreciate your taking time to give us this explanation, as Brian mentioned. And we just want to mention that she is the training manager for the Virginia Department of Veterans Services, Veterans Benefit Service Line. The Benefit Service Line is comprised of over 100 employees and 34 officers statewide that assist veterans and eligible family members obtain the federal and state benefits that they have earned through their military service. Also want to mention that Brandy is also an adjunct professor at Washington and Lee University School of Law in Lexington, Virginia, and teaches a practice on veterans law. She's a member of the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims Bar Association and the National Organization of Veterans Advocates. Her ties to the military and veteran community, however, is not just her work, but life as well. Her father, sister, and both grandfathers are all veterans. So, and she grew up on Coast Guard bases in different places in the United States. So she is very well knowledgeable of what veterans are about. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Cliff. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Brian, as well. I'm happy to be here tonight.
And we are so pleased to have you with us. Give us, I guess we should start off with similarities.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I right before I toss it to Brandy, I'll mention a couple of big points.
Yeah, sure.
Just about Illinois.
Right.
We have 102 counties, and your listeners have heard me talk about this, but 40 of those counties are metropolitan areas, Chicago, and then some of our other small cities, Springfield, Decatur, Peoria, things like that. That leaves 2/3 of the state is non-urban, non-metro areas. And in those non-metro areas, we have well over 100,000 veterans, Cliff. And it's very interesting what's happening in rural America. In the past decade, rural America, by a 2-to-1 margin, has depopulated. We're losing people in rural America. For every one person moving out into the country, there's two moving out of the country. And then, and one thing I will mention, some of your listeners may have be wondering why we're talking about this rural topic. How many people in the listening audience have a family member or a friend who didn't come to a city, who stayed there, who, the grandma's still down there, grandpa's still down there, or their aunt's still down there? These are the people who are frequently, as Brandy will tell us, not represented by the system and not helped by the system. So on that happy note, we'll let Brandy take it and talk about some of the similarities and what she's seeing out there.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So not unlike, like you said, Illinois, so Virginia has 131 localities. Those include our cities as well as our counties, and 51 of them are considered rural. So Virginia is dealing with a total population of 8.4 million people. 7.2 are living in those urban areas, while only, 1.1, almost 1.2 are living in the rural areas. And our veteran population and our two states' veteran populations are also very similar. We have about 719,000 veterans, and 184,000 of those are rural. So we're dealing with about 25% of our population of veterans that are living in a rural area. And then what's the impact on that? And that's what we're, talking about today, is how do you make sure that we're taking care of those people and that we haven't forgotten them just because they're not in our urban centers. And in Virginia, you can kind of define our urban centers by that 95 corridor. You certainly have what we call NOVA, or our Northern Virginia area, and that's everything D.C., Metro, and then down into Richmond, which is our capital, and just straight down that 95 corridor. Our Tidewater areas, obviously we've got a lot of bases out there, so those are pretty populous. And then they also call Roanoke, which is where I'm at, a urban area. I would slightly disagree with that, but, there's standards out there in terms of what is rural and urban, so we certainly are more urban than our rural parts of the state. So that's kind of how Virginia breaks down in terms of what we look like in our rural versus urban population.
Kind of sounds a bit like us, doesn't it?
Yes,
Cliff?
yeah, it certainly does, Brian. Yeah, without a doubt. So what you have a very important position, Brandy. How do you deal with this? The problems with these folks that are in the areas that are not in the region, in the cities, actually. That's what we're talking about.
Sure, yeah. So like you said, so I'm the training manager, and I just make sure that our training programs are fitting the bill, and that all of our folks are shored up, and they've got all the tools in their toolbox, and they've got all the knowledge to go forth and do all the great work that they do. And I'll also disclaim I'm merely an employee. I'm not speaking for our agency or anything like that. All the opinions are my own.
Can you tell she's a lawyer, Cliff?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what kind of issues are you seeing? For us here, and I'm sure it's the same for you, there's a variety of issues in rural America, but one of the things we found here is elderly vets. We have a high percentage of those rural vets are elderly. Can you tell us about what the veteran community looks like in rural America, Brandy?
So our elderly population, our rural elderly population, is certainly aging in the same sense as our Virginia population as a whole. So 70% of our rural veterans are over the age of 55. So that's going to create a host of problems in getting them access to services in our rural areas. They obviously will have medical needs. They're going to start to have unique legal needs as well. And I think when we're talking about this aging population that we have, there's kind of two ways that you can do that. Age in place, right? When you're staying in your home and you've got those care providers that are able to serve you in your home and in the community, or you're talking about being relocated into a skilled nursing facility or an assisted living facility, which in Virginia is very difficult in our rural areas. We have less of those facilities, and I'm assuming that's probably the same in Illinois as well.
Yes,
you're right. It is, yeah.
Yeah, well, which one do you want to talk about first, Cliff? The aging in place in rural communities or skilled nursing in rural communities?
Brandy, what do you think? We wanted you on, obviously, because there is certainly a parallel situation between what we have here in Illinois, Chicago as, being the city, and those other 101 counties, primarily, and some of them, we got more people in the studio right now than than some of them have. So, what is the most serious, as Brian mentioned? What's the most serious situation there?
I think both present an equally serious situation. I think the Mission Act, which is VA's latest creation, is going to play into both of those. So let's just take aging in place first, because that, I think, is the preference of everybody, and certainly cheaper than doing a skilled nursing facility. So when you're talking about aging in place, you got to make sure that there's infrastructure there. People in the community, or you have providers that can come into your home and do in-home health care.
And what are you seeing as far as the availability of those services in rural populations?
So in Virginia, there's certainly a disparity depending on what county you're in, and Virginia actually has a really interesting map that you can look and you're scored on how well your access is to healthcare. And in our rural populations, you just don't have that infrastructure. There's just not enough enough doctors to go around.
So we heard a lot of talk recently about privatizing the VA. So somebody who's coming back to a rural community who has maybe polytrauma, some complex issues, are they going to be able to get that care from a non-VA physician in their community?
Right, highly unlikely, and certainly not alone. So Office of Rural Health says 56% of folks that are rural and enrolled in the VA Medical Center, they're over the age of 65. They're medically complex cases. They're more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, heart conditions, and that requires very frequent care, right? You can't let those things go 6 months to a year without touching a doctor's office. And so that definitely creates a problem when there is no access. There is no doctor's office.
Well, you mentioned.
Listen, let me ask this, because she did mention. You mentioned the Mission Act, Brandy, as VA's latest creation. What is that?
So the Mission Act actually was, and it's a congressional creation as well. And VA is currently in the process of implementing all of the statutory guidance that Congress provided. There's two pieces of that which really play into our discussion here. Mm-hmm. One of them is that they're trying to replace the Choice Act and expand that community care. And that's great, again, if you have the infrastructure there. So in an urban area where you're talking about less access to a VA medical center because of wait times, it's obviously a great option to be able to go into your community and go pick whatever doctor that you like and that VA has obviously vetted. Versus when you're dealing with that in a rural community, again, it's great to have an option, but if you can't get to the VA medical center and you don't have a private doc in the area either, that act isn't serving you.
Wow. So what is happening with that then? The Choice Act that's in place now? Is that correct?
That's correct, but there's funding issues, and then once Mission comes fully in place, and I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I think they said they wanted to do that by June 6th. Then Mission will fully replace the Choice Act.
Wow. Okay.
You sound less than enthused about that.
Me or Cliff, I think we have the same sentiments about it.
So you were talking about aging in place and the availability of physicians. So what are some of the other elderly issues that you're seeing for those aging in place and for those who are going to need some skilled nursing or a nursing home? I mean, before we start that, how many rural hospitals have you lost in Virginia? We're losing them here.
Yeah, we've lost 2 in Virginia. We almost lost a third, which was down actually very close to me, and it was a mental health hospital, and one of the only in the area. So fortunately, we've been able to keep that open, but it's probably one of those that is high risk of losing. So yeah, Virginia's lost 2 in our southwest and south side areas since 2010. And then, of course, as you know, there's 104 nationwide that we've lost, and 600, almost 700 that are kind of on the chopping block at a high risk of being closed.
So we're losing, the stats I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we're losing more hospital beds. We're losing those at a faster rate than rural America is depopulating.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And even the ones that are still there, in Virginia, there's 67 skilled nursing facilities in a rural area, and there's like 300 in the state that would otherwise accept Medicare. Obviously, there's more if you're self-pay, but if you're Medicare, which is kind of the population that we're dealing with, your options are more limited.
Okay.
This is an interesting situation because, of course, our guest, who is an expert on this issue, is talking about the same thing, the same problems we're having here in Illinois. And that's the reason we are having her on, because we're seeing how the impact is to these elderly veterans and what kind of health care they're going to be getting. And anyone who would like to call us, we always want to hear from you. 312-374-8130 is our number, 312-374-8130. We have veterans, of course, we're able to talk to. And some of them, Brian, we've already heard, have had the same problems that Brandy is talking about.
Absolutely.
And that's because of course, the reason that the states are so similar. Illinois has one large city, obviously, and the other 101 counties, hey, you're on your own, so to speak. I hope it's not that bad. But we'll find out. It's a very important issue, and we're so pleased to have somebody who is really what Virginia is doing there with our guest is something that everybody needs to know about. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So we're so pleased to have her on. We will be back with more in just a moment. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. This is America's Heroes Group. I'm Cliff Kelly, and of course Brian Kloss is with us, and we are talking with our very esteemed guest, Brandy Disbennett, Albrecht, Training Manager for the Virginia Department of Veteran Services, Veterans Benefits Service Line, and there's some good things that are happening, but we need to know about them, that's for sure. Stay with us. We'll be back with more in just a moment. And this is America's Heroes Group Roundtable Outside the City with Brian Kloss. I'm Cliff Kelly, and we are pleased to continue this conversation with our outstanding guest, because we are talking about rural elderly veterans, specifically those in non-metro communities. And Brandy Disbennett Albrecht, Training Manager for the Virginia Department of Veteran Services, Veterans Benefits and Service Line, is an expert on this. And Brian, as we know, there is a comparison with what's going on in many places, but Virginia and Illinois are very much the same relative to what is happening.
Absolutely. If you look at some of the things affecting Virginia, like the collapse of tobacco farming, the collapse of coal, that has direct corollaries to deep southern Illinois.
Yeah.
Deep southern Illinois used to be a center for the United Mine Workers. Good luck finding a mining job down there now. One of the things I wanted to mention before we go back to Brandy is the VA has recognized that they're not addressing rural vets. They've had a variety of initiatives. They're trying to do telepsychiatry. They're trying to do a lot of things internet-based and app-based. The only problem is that the vast majority of rural America is dial-up. Their apps don't work. Yeah. Cliff has given me a quizzical look. Yes, a lot of rural America is dial-up, Cliff. They don't have the tech that we take for granted. And the solutions the VA is trying to come up with simply don't work. And Brandy is, I think we're lucky to have her, because she's one of the few people in the country talking about rural vets. What do urban vets and rural vets have in common, Cliff?
Yeah,
They
you're
both
right.
serve.
Yep.
You know, it's,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You're not
Yeah.
the city folk or country folk. You're
You're all
Army
veterans,
Green.
right? Yeah, you're all veterans. Brandy, what he's saying makes a lot of sense about the fact.
For
And how do
once.
you deal with that? The fact that these people, what did you call it, Brian? That they don't have the ability to get the information.
Right.
Yeah.
They're in.
They're not, the electronics is not
Yeah,
there.
they're just in an electronic oasis, an electronic desert.
Yeah.
When I ran the legal clinic here, we'd get calls from people downstate who would, and from other states, who would have to drive to a library in order to get a connection and be able to send us stuff. It was, I hear stories from people in these areas. I'd ask Brandy, how many times have you had to go up and knock on a door or consult the map because in the hills and valleys your GPS does not work?
Oh, absolutely. I remember some of my first trips kind of far southwest Virginia, and you hope you're on the right road because there's no cell service that GPS is linking up with. So, we just do a lot of, you got to meet the veterans where they are. And Brian, we're like you, we hear a lot from our veterans. They're going to the library to get access and things like that. Cox Communications in Virginia has actually done a low-cost program to try to solve some of that. And then I was listening to a podcast that Virginia Rural Health does as well. And there's this is nationwide, a program for finding broadband, and it's called Test IT. And it's an app that you can put on your phone, and then as you travel around, you can test your area for broadband, and then they're going to collect all this data and take it back to Congress to say, hey, this, all the broadband stuff isn't working. They're going to really try to identify where the gaps are. And that's great if you have a cell phone with, that you can download this app and actually use it. But that was the first I had heard of it, and I thought that was really interesting.
Well, Brandy, before we went to break, you were started to talk about some skilled nursing issues, and you were talking about the Mission Act. And Cliff's done some shows on the Mission Act. I'd like to follow up on that a bit. If we have people in these communities who are going to be trying to age in place or go to a skilled nursing facility in their community, who's going to be providing that caregiver support? Where are they going to find those skills? What's happening in rural communities?
Yeah, that's a great segue to kind of the other really, I think, impactful piece of the Mission Act, which is they're expanding the caregiver program. So the caregiver program used to only be available for those post 9/11 veterans with severe disabilities. Now they're going to open up to everybody, to all eras of veterans, which is really important. And they're going to phase that in, actually. They're only going to start with folks that were discharged pre-1975. And then once that works, then they'll open it up to the rest, is how it looks like it's going to go. But that program would allow, like a spouse or maybe a child or a friend to kind of learn those skills and step into that role of caregiver for the veteran. And then the flip side of that question is, okay, well, do you, have somebody that's there that is also, I guess, has the ability to have those skills? Or are they dealing with their own disabilities where they can't step up to be caregiver without, taking on a sacrifice of their own?
So we're looking at a lot of
to see that they are expanding it.
So we're looking at spouses and kids, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you could be a really nice neighbor or a friend that could also qualify as a caregiver, but generally your spouses and kids are where you're looking.
Now, this isn't just something that affects rural communities. This is going to affect any vet family listening out there. Where do you find more info about the Caregiver Act, and more importantly, what are the qualifications? How does a listener out there apply if they've got a Vietnam era parent or a post 9/11 child that needs this?
Yeah, they can't yet. Hopefully they will be able to do that starting June 6th, and they'll just work through their VA medical center, and hopefully that's a place that they can get, and they'll start the process there. But there is an application, and then there's, kind of vetting of who is this person that's going to step in as caregiver. they have to go through a certain amount of training, but respite care is provided for that veteran that obviously is needing the care, so they fill that place. And then the Mission Act also talks about really incorporating this caregiver into the whole treatment plan of the veteran. So that's going to be a real plus too. And so long as that person is able to really bridge that gap and step over those hurdles of transportation or even internet and broadband issues, if there's telehealth involved, if they can help, then it's going to be a great system. It's going to work really well for our folks in rural areas. But I worry about the skills gap.
Hope springs eternal. What's your assessment?
Yep, that's true. Yeah. That's true. One thing I want to make sure, and I know you, Brandy, you would be looking after this, but rural vet women, the females, has the VA forgotten about them, or is that covered?
Such a hard issue.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 6% of rural women are enrolled in the VA healthcare. So I guess if you should really think about that the other way. So of all the veterans that live in a rural area that are enrolled in VA healthcare, only 6% of those are female veterans.
Wow.
Yeah, and in 2017, it was really interesting. The Office of Rural Health basically flat out said we're under-equipped to provide for our rural female veterans.
So they recognize there's a problem.
Yeah, they absolutely did. They recognized the problem. And then so what have they done kind of since then? And I think they have tried to take steps, but I'm not sure if it's quite reached the rurality issue yet. There's a lot of action going on right now in the sphere of women veterans, which is great. So we have the Center for Women's Veterans, which is currently advertising the 2019 Empowered Virginia Women's Summit. That's actually here in Virginia, hosted by DVS in Hampton. So that was exciting. They also have a Women Veterans Call Center, which is 855 VA Women. And there's a chat program to that, too. And then there is a call center, which is kind of news to me, that 24/7 healthcare professional will be available for enrolled women veterans, and that's through the VA Medical Center. And it doesn't give you a phone number online. It just says call your medical center to get this phone number. Talk to your Women's Veterans Program manager at the VA Medical Center.
So how do you get there after hours?
Link.
How do you get to that after hours then if it's 24/7, but they won't give you the number?
Right. So call 9 to 5 and then keep that number. So,
oh wow!
Way to go, VA.
Yeah. Well, at least they're trying. I'm not sure. One thing, Brandy, will make sure, and Brian, I know, agrees, to see exactly what our situation is here relative to the rural areas. That's why we were so happy to have you come on, because you have been able to give us such great information about circumstances, because the Virginia and Illinois, a lot of people don't understand the comparison, and we certainly have that, as Brian was mentioning, folks who used to have jobs down in southern Illinois who don't have them anymore, and 102 counties, and Chicago is only not even a total county of Cook. But of course, here we can do a lot better. So, what can we learn here, Brandy, based on what you do know about our circumstances and our conversation today? People who are listening, we have people listening from everywhere, thank goodness, and also because of the great job that our wonderful digital media producer does. we have people that are all over the country. But what to you is the most important thing that's happening, Brandy, relative to these people that are really outside of the box, so to speak?
I guess I would say that the two things that I would be most hopeful about would be telemedicine and broadband. If we could get those two things working in tandem, I just think it would answer so much of the issues that are going on in the rural communities. After that, I mean, we could make a whole list of ways that we can continue to address these problems. I mean, there's just, you don't fix just one problem and everything is solved. You know,
Right.
one leads to another, leads to another. So,
Yeah.
but I think certainly telemedicine and broadband would fix an immediate need.
Have you seen any inroads being made in those specific areas?
So in Virginia, we have. So our VHA hospitals that are in Virginia, the medical centers, they've been leaning pretty heavily into telemedicine, and particularly on the mental health side. So that's been very helpful, and so we've seen some of that come to fruition. But again, it's an access issue. So when you're talking telemedicine, you're not necessarily always talking in the home, but maybe you've got some satellite location set up, and then from that satellite location, you're calling into a VA medical center. But I'll take baby steps.
Well, and Brandy's in a unique position, Cliff,
Sure.
because DC is right on her doorstep.
Right. It
VA's
helps.
testing stuff there.
Yeah.
And getting it out in the field fast. So what they're seeing in Virginia, we're hopefully going to see in the not too distant future in Illinois.
Yeah. Well, Brian, you're on top of those sort of things. Do you know what Illinois is doing?
Illinois is not as far advanced. We've got, we're very lucky. We've got the place up at North Chicago, the Level Center.
Sure.
The Combined Center up there. We've got our two here in Chicago. And downstate, we've got Marion, and then we've got all the other smaller facilities in between. But the telemedicine is not up to where it needs to be, and that's limited by tech. Until we are able to get tech out into these communities, they're going to be doing what they continue to be doing. And that brings up another big issue as we look at these communities is, frankly, transportation.
Yeah.
How do you get to the VA
I know.
if you're living 2 hours from the VA and you're not getting on the blue line because there isn't any? So,
Brandy, how have you all been dealing with that? That's a good point he's making, the transportation.
Yeah, also a huge issue in Virginia. And we rely on many different folks. You know, our other VSOs that operate in the state, like DAV, they'll run a shuttle back and forth to a VA medical center, so that's been helpful. Other church organizations, they'll do it, and then there's some other partners that we can use. We also have, DVS has a whole separate service line that we call VBFS, the Virginia Veteran and Family Support. And sometimes they can help us solve those issues too. They're just a whole network of folks. It's just finding them and tapping into them. But yeah, there's no public transportation that's a sure thing. There's a line that'll run you from Roanoke to Blacksburg, think Virginia Tech. It's only about maybe 40 minutes down the road, and from Roanoke to the end of the state, still another 4 hours. So it's not a complete solution in terms of the public transportation that we've got here.
That's a problem, Brian, we're going to have here.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's a problem. Now, Brandy, since you do all this work with the veteran service officers, there's something that's going to be of real interest to everybody listening who's a vet or is involved with the vet, and that's the recent changes to how the VA is handling cases and appeals, and how they're going to make it, I think, a lot more difficult for the vet to appeal an incorrect VA decision. Care to comment on that?
I would love to comment on that.
That was called slow, high, and over the plate.
All right.
So the AMA, the Appeals Modernization Act, it completely changed the appeal system and how veterans will make choices on how they appeal. So first of all, they have to be able to make a choice in terms of the appeal option that's best for them. And that can be difficult, and hopefully that's where they're seeking the assistance of representation, and we're driving them into our offices. But the challenge is that, VA, whenever they made a decision on a claim, they used to send you all the paperwork that says, here's how you appeal, and here's the appeal form with it. Now they're not going to do that. They're going to tell you, here's how you appeal, and here's the appeal form with it. They're going to tell you, here's how you appeal, you need to go online and get the forms yourself.
Yeah, so imagine coming back, perhaps say a brain injury. You're 20 years old, you got a brain injury. The VA tells you you're not getting benefits, and then they toss it back to you to try and figure it out all on your own. Thanks, VA. Sorry, Brandy, I interrupted you.
No, that's exactly it. It's here's our decision and have fun. We'll figure out what to do next. And that's a terrible place for a veteran to be, particularly in a rural community.
Sure.
How are you accessing that? Can you access a representative? There's just a whole host of other issues that go along with that. And then let's say you can access the forms. Are you making the right appellate decision? Because each of the three lanes are so vastly different. So I think it's going to create a lot of challenges for our rural veterans that don't have as easy access to representation.
But with your position, Brandy, I mean, you're a lawyer, and so forth. You teach veterans law, a member of the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and the Bar Association. Therefore, we can go on and on and on. I'm sure that if there's anybody who can advise these people that have a problem, as Brian points out, you can give them a lot of help. Are you able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we just hope that we are out there enough in our communities that they know who to call, and that they can find us to answer the question. But yeah, we can answer them all day long, and so that's really great. And there's plenty of resources out there. It's just making sure we're connecting them to the right place.
Well, and every state's got somebody like Brandy. There's veteran service officers in every state. One of the disadvantages we have in Illinois is that they're county based, and most states are like that. And the state funds them. They send the money through the county, and the county provides them with space. We get to deep southern Illinois, they're not staffed. We don't have them.
They're not staffed.
We don't have them in many of these tiny counties. So they have to travel to other counties, because most veteran service officers are not limited to their counties. They help a vet.
Right.
But if you're way south in Polk County and say they don't have one, where are you going? You're driving 60 miles to Marion, Illinois.
St. Clair, whatever.
Yeah, St. Clair, the Marion, absolutely. And if you have had an illness or injury that affects your ability to drive, how are you getting there?
Yeah.
You're bumming a ride. And that, to me, just sounds particularly cruel of what we're doing to these vets. And in Brandy, I'm sure your stats mirror ours, because it's the same in a lot of the other states, is that rural vets come back to their community because that's where their support network is. If they're injured or ill, those who aren't are depopulating at a faster rate than the rest of their community. So they're using their GI Bill and they're going up to Peoria to work for CAT or Chicago to do something, or getting out of Dodge. And we have some communities in Illinois with twice the disabled rate of the national average. And that's, I think, only going to increase. Brandy, are you seeing that in other communities as well?
Yeah, we are. And I would say it's even... I think that most of, especially our younger populations that are getting out of the service today, they're not going back home to that rural community because there's nothing there. The unemployment rates in those communities can be upwards of 25%, especially since those industries left. So they're not. They're using, like you said, they're using their GI Bills, and they're moving into Richmond or into Roanoke even, or Northern Virginia, D.C. I mean, you see, we have a lot of both state jobs and federal jobs here, and we're attracting those folks. And we're just not seeing folks go back into those rural communities once they've left. And that's why you have 70% of our rural veterans that are over the age of 55. You don't have that young blood that's necessarily going back home.
As somebody who turned 55 a few weeks ago, I take great offense to that. Just saying.
Sorry, Brian.
Well, so where do you see us going here? I mean, you're one of the pros on this, Brandy, and we appreciate all the information you've given us. Help us. Where do we go now? What's going to happen?
I don't know, and I wouldn't even call me a pro. I just read a lot. But I don't know how you solve these problems, because when you solve one, you've got another one right behind it. I think the most we can do is continue to talk about these things, make sure we're getting it in front of the right people, and then we can make networks of change and not just changing one thing at a time. And I think that's going to be the key to success. I certainly think there's a ton of ways that we can be innovative. And I've heard other people kind of say the same thing. You have a problem, and this is what people do, is that they fix problems. And you have a good opportunity here, but you just have to be willing to take on a lot.
Who do you
different aspects.
I say this as somebody who lives in a state that has a double amputee female combat vet in the Senate. Are there anybody?
Right.
Yeah, is there anybody in the House or the Senate that you see as a particularly strong advocate on behalf of the issues of rural vets and even of rural vet women?
In Virginia?
No, in Washington. Who can you see
gosh.
as?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're up on your Capitol Hill. I would think that our senator would be a natural on this one, Cliff.
Yeah, combat vet, lost both legs, and helicopter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody on Capitol Hill particularly concentrating on this, or are you a voice in the wilderness on this?
I hope I'm not the voice in the wilderness on it. You certainly see the names that are coming up on, and there's a lot of initiatives in Congress right now, and even in our state legislature, talking about veterans. And I just, I think we continue to owe that duty. I understand that the National Organization of Veterans Advocates, they have kind of what they call a Hill Day, that they go to D.C. and they're talking to their folks and trying to get issues addressed as well. So I wouldn't say I have a single champion name in mind, but I do think it's enough of a bipartisan issue that, folks are listening. So.
It well should be. You don't want to give us that name?
No.
Ever the skillful attorney, she doesn't want to alienate a potential advocate on behalf of her issue.
Well, you have given us some great information, Brandy. We certainly appreciate it, because we have a comparable problem. And, as long as we know there's people like you, we hope that the things can be solved right here in Illinois, because we've got a lot of vets.
I hope we can catch up to what Brandy's got going in Virginia.
Absolutely. Brandy, thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you guys. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk. And like I said, the more we talk about it, I think more people will hear and pay attention, and we can solve problems.
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much, Brandy.
All right, thank you guys. Have a great evening.
And you too now. Attorney Brian Kloss, thank you so much, sir.
Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for reducing your normally high standards to allow me to come in as a guest.
Come on. You know what I think of you. You're great. You're just
and likewise, my friend.
Okay, thanks so much for coming in. All right. Stay with us. We will be back with more of America's Heroes Group right after this.